Hello YouTube, this is Keith from Keith's Aquariums. Today I'm going to talk to you about CO2 in a planted tank. Two main methods of injecting or putting CO2 into your tank. One's the DIY system and the other is the injected from a canister with a regulator. So the DIY system, or yeast, water, sugar method, you use a jug. I used a juice bottle, a jug here. You can use a soda pop bottle, and what you notice is this tubing coming out of the top of these lids here. The hard part about doing a DIY system is getting that tubing airtight. That tubing has to be airtight right there. If you don't get it airtight, your CO2 will leak out from around the tubing and not go into your tank. So, how you make a DIY CO2 yeast, water, sugar mixture. Take this jug, fill it up about 3/4 of the way with warm water. Take about a cup of sugar, put it in there, you shake it up and get that sugar all melted. You take about a tablespoon of yeast, put it in a little cup with a little bit of warm water. You don't want it hot or it's going to kill the yeast, and you don't want it cold or it's not going to activate the yeast to start growing, whatever it does. So you activate that yeast, you pour it in there, yeast, water, and sugar. Put your lid on, making sure your lid is airtight, your tubing is airtight, and that'll start injecting CO2 in your tank. I had a 2-bottle system going here, had another bottle over here, and I had this little T valve in here, and that went out to my aquarium. So the problem with a DIY yeast, water, sugar mixture is inconsistency. The CO2 will produce, it'll go up, and then it'll drop off. The problem with DIY CO2 is that you get fluctuations in CO2 levels, and that will cause a major algae outbreak in your tank. It's better off to have low levels of CO2 than fluctuating levels of CO2. So that's a rough explanation of what a DIY CO2 injection for your planted tank is. I've graduated up to a canister with a regulator, and I'm going to show you that right now. What I have here is a paintball canister with a regulator. This regulator is made by Aquatech of California. It was about 75 bucks, and it shows the how much pressure you have, how much CO2 you have in your bottle, and then it shows you at what, I don't quite understand what these valves are, but I look at this one, I don't look at that one anymore. I don't understand why I need to look at that one. But anyway, about 70 bucks, 75 bucks for the regulator. The bottle was about 25 bucks at Academy. You can get those bottles filled at Academy for like 5 bucks, I think. Another important thing you need to get is this little thing right here. This allows this regulator to match up with the fittings on this paintball canister, that blue fitting. When you go to order this off of Aquatech, they'll suggest that you get this blue fitting. It's an adapter that allows these two to match up. And so you also want to make sure that you get a regulator that has a solenoid on it. A solenoid is this little black thing right here. You see the electrical cord that goes out. I have this hooked up to a timer that comes on, starts the CO2 at about an hour before the lights come on, and then when the lights come on, the tank is already full of CO2. So that is how I put CO2 in my tank now. A couple other components that go along with an injected CO2 are a bubble counter. and you'll see a bubble counter right over here. This is a bubble counter. See the little bubbles coming up? What I've heard is 2 to 3 bubbles a second. I think I have doing something like that, maybe a little bit more, but I'm ramping up the CO2 as much as my fish can tolerate it. The best gauge to tell about how much CO2 you have is if your fish go to the surface, start gasping for air, you have too much CO2 and not enough oxygen in the tank. So what I have here is the way I'm putting the CO2 in my tank is with a power head. I don't know if you can see the tubing that curves around in the intake of the valve of the power head, and it blows a fine mist of bubbles out into the tank. I think that works a lot better than a one of those diffusers, because the CO2 sprays out through the whole tank, whereas a diffuser will just bubble straight up and it doesn't spray throughout the whole tank. You can see my plants are purling all over the place. See the little fine bubbles coming up out of the plants? See right here, there's some little bubbles coming up and stuff. I don't know if you can see that. But anyway, one more method of giving CO2 to your tank is with this stuff right here. Let me find it. Look in my, oh yeah, here it is right here. This is Excel Flourish, and that's a liquid CO2, and I didn't like it. I didn't really get much results from it, and it killed some of my plants in my tank. You have to be careful with this stuff right here, because whenever you have plants like the jungle val here, melts them. Anacharis melts it. I don't know. I didn't have much use for this stuff. A lot of people swear by it and say it works really well. I bought the small bottle and it's not even gone. Maybe I didn't dose enough. I don't know, but I didn't like this stuff. By far the best method for putting CO2 in your tank is with a regulator and a canister. And but yeah, that's kind of how I do CO2 now, and it's working really well. And I appreciate everybody. Comment and subscribe, and have a nice day.